She's just the fossil with the purse, her son laughed to his groomsmen. His bride twirled Eleanor's vintage Chanel like a party favor. They thought she'd paid to be ignored. By morning, the wedding balance was overdue, and Mom was gone. No warning, no apology, just silence and a frozen trust fund, and the man she raised about to learn what payback really costs. The wine had barely touched the linen when Eleanor stepped back into the courtyard unnoticed. The laughter was careless, loud, groomsmen in polished loafers and rented bravado. Her son stood at the center, glass in hand, tie loosened like he'd already survived something. Andrew's voice cut through the twilight like a dull knife, trying too hard. "Don't worry about her," he said with a chuckle. "She's just the fossil with the purse." There was laughter, sharp, collective, cruel in its ease. One of the groomsmen elbowed him. "Seriously, man, come on. It's true, she wanted this whole Southern Charm circus. I just let her bankroll it." The sound didn't echo, but it reverberated. Eleanor stood just beyond the jasmine hedge, her spine stiffening inch by inch. She could still smell the low-country shrimp boil from the dinner buffet, but the taste in her mouth had turned to metal. She turned, walked quietly to her table, and sat precisely, deliberately. If anyone noticed the paleness in her face, no one said a thing. Across the table, Sloane tilted her champagne flute and smiled. "Your earrings are just to die for, Eleanor." "Vintage, right?" "They were my mother's," Eleanor said softly. "Oh." Sloane barely glanced up. "Well, I'm sure they'll look great in the wedding photos." "No, thank you. No warmth. Just expectation." Eleanor didn't respond. Her hands lay folded in her lap, still and dry. The silver band on her ring finger, a relic she hadn't removed in nearly 3 decades, felt heavier than usual. Flashbacks threaded silently beneath her composed surface, writing checks without pause, booking the venue in Mount Pleasant because Sloane wanted something elegant but southern, the $12,000 wedding dress flown in from New York, the band, the rentals, the flower arrangements modeled after a celebrity wedding Eleanor didn't recognize. $83,000. Every dollar hers, every receipt she'd signed. No one had asked if she could afford it. They assumed because she looked like someone who could. A waiter came by with dessert menus. Eleanor didn't touch hers. She stared across the candlelit table, past Andrew's polished smile and Sloane's perfect posture, and saw the thing they had built. Not a marriage, but a spectacle, one paid for in quiet sacrifices and uncashed boundaries. The best man raised a toast. To the Grant family, to the woman who made this all possible. Everyone turned to her. Eleanor smiled, polite, restrained. Sloane leaned over, her voice light and mocking. "You know, there's something kind of charming about old-fashioned mothers. They just give, no questions." Eleanor turned to her slowly. "Is that right?" "Oh, I mean it as a compliment," Sloane added quickly, laughing. Eleanor's smile didn't move, but her eyes had changed. They were no longer soft, they were surgical. She excused herself before the next course, murmuring something about needing to rest. No one protested. Back in her suite, she sat on the edge of the bed and took out her phone. For a long moment, she stared at the screen, thumb hovering. Then, with the same precision she once used to balance household budgets in the early 90s, she pulled up her contact list. She tapped one name, Morgan Blake, estate law. Her text was only 8 words. "Can we freeze the wedding fund transfer?" She hit send. The morning sun poured in like judgment through the grand windows of the bridal suite at the Charleston Harbor Resort. The room was draped in white silk, champagne flutes clinking against the edges of marble countertops, laughter bouncing off the antique mirrors. Eleanor sat near the window in a powder blue dress, her own choosing, understated and dignified. She hadn't been invited to be there, but her checkbook had been, so she was. The bridesmaids floated around her like tulle-wrapped dragonflies, chattering and spritzing perfume into air already saturated with it. Their voices rose and fell in high, breathy tones, effortless and unaware. In the corner, Sloane posed with her bouquet in one hand and Eleanor's purse in the other, a vintage Chanel from Paris, gifted to Eleanor by her late husband on their 10th anniversary. One of the bridesmaids laughed, snapping a photo. "God, this thing is ancient, like actually vintage, but real though, no knockoff here." Sloane twirled it by the strap and smirked. "Just like the woman it came with." Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply adjusted the hem of her dress with deliberate calm, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle. Moments later, Sloane's mother leaned over with the careful cruelty Southern women had mastered for generations. You've really held up well, Eleanor, for your generation. Thank you, Eleanor said softly. So have your opinions. The woman blinked, her smile freezing like porcelain under pressure, but Eleanor had already turned away. She stared at the dress hanging in the center of the room, $12,000 of ivory silk and imported lace. Eleanor had wired the deposit herself and covered the custom tailoring fees without flinching. She'd done the same for the reception band, the coastal venue, and even the hand-calligraphed invitations embossed with gold leaf. None of it had been asked for explicitly. That was the elegance of how they'd done it. They hadn't begged, they'd assumed. Andrew entered briefly, resplendent in his tux, and scanned the room. When his eyes landed on her, his smile thinned. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said. "Good. Just try not to make it about you, okay?" Her nod was quiet, sharp, there was no apology in it. He kissed Sloane on the cheek and disappeared just as quickly as he came. Eleanor turned back to the mirror. For the first time in years, she noticed the subtle rings beneath her eyes, not from age, but from giving too much. Time, money, grace. The suite emptied slowly as the women drifted toward the ceremony. Eleanor remained behind for a moment, alone with the champagne bottle, half drained, and the chaos of curling irons and flower petals, strewn like battlefield remains. She picked up her purse, wiped the smudged fingerprint Sloane had left on the gold clasp, and walked to the elevator. The ceremony was set against the sea, the guests facing the harbor, waves glittering like a polished stage curtain. Eleanor sat in the second row, beside strangers who knew her only as the groom's mother. The officiant spoke. The bride walked down the aisle, gliding like a well-funded dream. Eleanor's hands were folded neatly in her lap. The vows began. Sloane's voice rang out, syrupy, perfect. Andrew smiled like a man who believed he'd won. The minister turned to him. "Do you, Andrew Grant?" That was the moment Eleanor stood, not rushed, not dramatic. She rose as if remembering something she'd left behind. The breeze caught the edge of her dress as she stepped out of the row and walked down the aisle. Not toward them, but away. Murmurs rose. Someone whispered her name. No one stopped her. She reached the edge of the gathering, slipped behind a cluster of hydrangeas, and vanished from view. Eleanor's heels clicked softly against the stone path leading away from the ceremony. The muffled hum of vows, wind, and gossip ebbed behind her like a tide that would never return. She didn't stumble, didn't cry. She simply walked, spine straight, eyes forward. No one called her name. No one chased after her. She opened her car door with a steady hand and slid into the driver's seat of her Navy Lexus, her one indulgence after decades of restraint. The leather seat embraced her like an old friend. She rested her purse beside her, glanced at the venue through the rearview mirror one last time, and turned the key. As she drove down the sun-drenched avenue, Spanish moss waving from the live oaks overhead, she could almost hear the static in her veins begin to quiet, not disappear, but shift from ache to action. Back home, the house was still. Morning light had turned golden across the hardwood floors, catching the edge of the frame above the fireplace. A photo of Andrew at 7, gap-toothed and joyful, holding a kite she had helped him fly. She passed it without slowing. In the study, she knelt in front of the filing cabinet, pulled a small key from the chain around her neck, and unlocked the bottom drawer. It groaned open. Inside, decades of meticulous record-keeping, bank statements, wire transfer receipts, wedding invoices, itemized and initialed, the family trust documents bound in thick cream folders, a sealed manila envelope labeled Andrew, Education plus Condo. Next to it, a photo of her and her late husband at their wedding reception. He was laughing, his hand on her shoulder, her smile wide and real. She hadn't smiled like that in years. She laid the wedding binder on her desk, flipped to the final page, the payment schedule for the remaining $41,750, flowers, lighting, catering overages. The checkboxes beside each item sat empty, waiting for her authorization. She picked up her pen, paused, then with one stroke she slashed a long line diagonally across the page, and underneath she wrote, "Void, no further disbursements approved." It was not rage in her hands, it was resolve. She logged into her secure financial portal. Each vendor's payment on hold, not declined, not disputed, just never finalized. A single transaction remained on her to-do list. She clicked it. Payment sent. $2,500 to Morgan Blake, ESQ. Advisory retainer, done. She closed the laptop and breathed in slowly, deeply, the kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding for years. Upstairs, she retrieved her travel bag, the one she always meant to use but never had a reason. She packed it in 10 minutes. 3 silk blouses, 1 wool cardigan, her favorite linen slacks, and a single paperback novel she never finished. Before she left, she opened the safe behind the bookshelf, withdrew 20 crisp $100 bills in bundled stacks, $20,000 total, carefully counted. She slipped the cash into her purse, the same one Sloane had mocked, and zipped it shut like sealing a vault. She didn't leave a note. There was nothing to explain. As the sun dipped low over Charleston's pastel skyline, Eleanor pulled onto the highway, heading north toward Asheville. She had no itinerary, just a boutique hotel booked under her full name. For once, she wanted to be seen. No aliases, no mother of the groom, just Eleanor Grant. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. She glanced at it. Andrew Mobile. She let it ring and ring and ring until silence returned like an old friend. The wine glass trembled slightly in Eleanor's hand, not from nerves, but from the weight of years. She sat alone in a velvet-backed chair by the window of the boutique hotel room, high above the glow of Asheville's cobblestone streets. The room smelled faintly of sandalwood and fresh linens, but her mind was steeped in older scents: baby powder, spilled scotch, and the sterile chill of hospital rooms where she had whispered her strength into Andrew's tiny fists. Now the silence around her wasn't absence, it was permission, her own. She placed the glass down carefully and opened her purse, the same mocked relic that had funded more than most families' annual salaries. Inside, nestled between a velvet envelope and her wallet, was a single silver pen engraved "To Eleanor with Love, R.G. Richard, dead at 38. Cancer didn't care about young fathers. It didn't care about single mothers either. She pulled out the manila folder her attorney had mailed ahead. Revocation of beneficiary status, Grant Family Trust. The title glared back in bold sans serif font. As her eyes flicked across the lines, flashbacks crept in like ghosts through cracks in the wall. Andrew, barely 6, sobbing into her blouse at his father's funeral. At 15, demanding designer sneakers she couldn't afford and getting them. Anyway, at 22, beaming as she handed him the keys to a new Camry graduation gift. At 27, walking out of the bank she'd co-signed on so he could buy his first condo, her name hidden in fine print. Every time she thought, this will make him feel safe, this will make him grateful. Instead, it made him forget the price she paid for his comfort. Her own life on pause, her own dreams bartered for his ease. Outside the window, a young couple walked hand in hand, laughing. It hit her then. She'd never remarried. Never even tried. She was too busy parenting someone who mistook sacrifice for service. She signed the first page, then the second, a final flourish on the dotted line. It was done. The inheritance, once evenly split, would now skip Andrew entirely, automatically, irrevocably. In his place, 2 entities: the Southern Women's Housing Project and a college fund for first-generation female students in Charleston. Richard's name would live on, not as a footnote in Andrew's life, but as a beacon for women like her, women who were never seen until they were gone. She stood and poured the last inch of wine into her glass. The burgundy liquid shimmered like blood in low light. She clinked her glass gently against the rim of her purse. "To the price of silence," she whispered. "May you never collect again." Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message preview flickered. "Andrew, are you seriously ignoring me during my wedding night?" Eleanor stared at the screen, so that was the cost he couldn't calculate. Not money, not reputation, silence. The kind that doesn't beg, doesn't flinch, doesn't explain. She silenced the phone, turned it face down, and let the night do what it always did, fold her into quiet. But this time it held her like a reward, not a punishment. The pen in Eleanor's hand didn't shake. It moved with precise finality, dragging blue ink across a document that had once been drawn in hope, now rewritten in justice. She looked up from the legal paperwork spread across the oak table in her Asheville rental, sunlight pooling like gold over each notarized page. Her lawyer, Philip Mars, sat across from her in a tailored navy suit, his expression unreadable. "You sure you want to activate this clause?" he asked gently. "It's enforceable, but it will burn a few bridges, publicly." Eleanor didn't blink. "Then I suppose it's time they saw the fire they built." The clause had been buried deep in her estate plan, something Richard had insisted on including back when he still believed Andrew would grow into a man of character. It was a conditional gift reversion clause. If financial abuse, exploitation, or documented verbal degradation occurred, all non-essential luxury assets given to Andrew could legally revert to Eleanor or her estate. And thanks to social media, Andrew and Sloane had handed her the match. She unlocked her phone and opened Instagram, scrolling through the flurry of wedding content under #AndrewSaysZido. The photos were polished, golden hour smiles, filtered tears, laughter, but it was the comments, unfiltered, viciously amused, that gave her everything she needed. LOL at that old woman in the corner. Must be the donor. Can't believe she paid for this. Rich fossils be wild. Real ones know the purse paid for the petals. One in particular stopped her cold. A video clip, 30 seconds long, from one of the groomsmen. Andrew, champagne in hand, laughing. My mom, she's just the walking wallet. Or as Sloane calls her, the fossil with a purse. Eleanor paused the video, her face still, her fingers precise. She took a screenshot, then another, then emailed them directly to Philip. These count as public record? She asked. He checked the metadata. Yes, and they've made them part of the wedding's public campaign. It's admissible. Her next moves came quickly, cleanly, years of passive endurance condensing into minutes of razor-sharp clarity. First, she met with a local real estate agent, a woman in her 40s with steel gray curls and a voice like rain. The condo's still in my name, Eleanor explained, sliding the deed across the table. My son believes it was a gift. It wasn't. It was a deferral. The agent looked at the marble countertops and the condo photos, the downtown location, the high ceilings. We can list it by Friday. Second, Eleanor updated her will, removing Andrew entirely. In his place, she named 4 beneficiaries: the Southern Women's Legal Defense Coalition, a Charleston nonprofit that helped abused senior women, and 2 charities supporting single mothers and first-generation female college students. I want my legacy to go where it's seen, she said, not where it's expected. Finally, she made one last transfer. $10,000 to the Legal Defense Fund, anonymous, untraceable, but with a short note. For the women who paid too long for too little for too many. That night, in the quiet of the rental cottage, she stood in front of a single cardboard box labeled Andrew. Inside were picture frames, birthdays, graduations, a wedding invite she now saw as a bill. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. One by one, she slid them into the fireplace, watched the colors curl and turn to ash. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a push notification. A new Instagram post from Sloane. Thanks to my husband and his mom for the best wedding ever. The caption sat beneath a perfectly edited photo of Sloane in her gown, Andrew beaming beside her, Eleanor in the blurred background, half cut from the frame. But Eleanor didn't open the app. She held the phone a moment, then tapped her settings. Delete account. Confirm permanent remove profile. Yes. On the other side of town, Sloane refreshed her notifications, waiting for a like from Eleanor's account. It never came. Eleanor wasn't watching anymore. The first sunlight spilled through the Charleston Suites' linen curtains, soft and golden like a blessing. But the room smelled of half-drunk Prosecco, roses past their prime, and a kind of sweetness that had already begun to sour. Sloane stirred first. Her silk robe slipped down one shoulder as she sat up in the king-sized bed, blinking at the clutter of spent lipstick tubes and discarded reception programs on the nightstand. A half-eaten macaron stuck to her phone screen. Andrew lay snoring beside her, one arm flung across a decorative pillow Eleanor had picked out. Then her phone vibrated once, twice. She checked it absently. 2 missed calls from the venue manager and a voicemail. She pressed play. Hi, this is Trina at Waterfront Gardens. Just wanted to confirm that the remaining balance of $17,200 is due today. The card on file didn't go through. Please call us before 1 p.m. to avoid late fees. Sloane's brows pinched. She shook Andrew's arm. Drew, she said, voice sharp. Why is Waterfront saying the payment didn't go through? He groaned, half awake. What? She pushed his shoulder. Your mom was supposed to handle this. Andrew sat up, bleary-eyed, then reached for his own phone. No service. He swiped again, tapping messages. No reply from Eleanor. He checked the payment app his mom had used for the planning. Pending. The transaction was flagged. He dialed her number. Straight to voicemail, again and again. Sloane, pacing now, crossed her arms. This isn't funny. I know, he muttered. I don't get it. She said she'd cover the rest after the ceremony. That was before you made that joke, Sloane muttered under her breath. Andrew turned to her. What? She waved it off. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Eleanor had walked out during the vows, and now it was like she'd vanished, disconnected, unreachable, like money that once felt permanent had suddenly proven temporary. By noon, they'd received 3 more calls. The florist hadn't been paid in full. The DJ's invoice bounced. The caterer, furious, held the $11,000 final invoice and threatened legal action if it wasn't paid by end of business. Did your mom seriously ghost her own son on his wedding day? Sloane snapped, pacing in slippers that still had price tags on the soles. Andrew's chest tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavy. Sloane's mother, Juliet, swept into the suite with perfectly curled hair and a face full of irritation. She sipped a mimosa like it was medicine. Well, she said, eyeing the crumpled tucks and empty envelopes, I suppose this is what happens when you trust someone else's bank account more than your own. Andrew sat on the edge of the bed, phone clutched in his palm like it had answers. I'll fix it, Juliet sighed. I'll float the florist and caterer temporarily, but if I don't see a reimbursement by next month, we will. Sloane interrupted quickly. Obviously, but the we was thinner than it had ever been. Down in Asheville, Eleanor sat in the velvet armchair of her hotel suite, a room that smelled of cedar and clean linen, with soft jazz humming low from a speaker in the corner. Her laptop was open, a single tab active, Charleston Women's Shelter donation page. She moved the cursor slowly, deliberately, adjusted the figure. $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. Click, confirmation. Thank you for your generous contribution, Miss Grant. Every dollar goes towards safe housing and freedom. Eleanor closed the screen, folded her glasses, and looked out at the view, blue hills rising in quiet strength. Her phone buzzed on the table. Andrew, 3 missed calls. She didn't even glance at it. Back in Charleston, Andrew stood outside her front door, fists clenched, still in his wedding suit from yesterday. No car. He'd left it with valet and never picked it up. He raised his hand to knock, unsure whether he hoped she'd answer or feared she would. The knock was sharp, impatient, not frantic, not desperate, just entitled. Eleanor set her tea down and walked to the front door with the slow composure of someone who already knew what the conversation would cost her and what it wouldn't. When she opened it, there he was, Andrew, shirt half untucked, dark circles under his eyes, his wedding boutonniere still wilted on the lapel of his suit jacket. He looked less like a groom and more like a man who'd just stumbled out of the storm he built. "Can I come in?" he asked. She held the door open but said nothing. Her silence was permission, not invitation. He stepped inside, glancing around like it had been years instead of weeks. The home smelled of lemongrass and pine oil. Everything was neat, untouched. She motioned toward the living room. "Tea?" He blinked. "Seriously?" She was already walking toward the kitchen. "Chamomile or Earl Grey?" He dropped onto the sofa like his spine gave out. "You made us look like fools," he spat. She returned moments later, setting his tea down gently. Her own cup never left her hand. "You made me look like air," she said, voice level. "So I returned the favor." He scoffed, running both hands over his face. "It was a joke, Mom. I didn't know you heard it." "I did," she said, settling into the armchair across from him. "Every word. Just like I heard Sloane say my purse looked authentic in a vintage way to her bridesmaids, like I wasn't even there." Again his mouth opened, but she raised a hand, calm, firm, a judge's gavel in motion. She reached behind her, opened a drawer from the side table, and pulled out a pristine folder. She laid it on the coffee table between them, slid it forward. He stared down at it. "Wedding budget," it read, labeled and tabbed. "You paid for it all?" he asked slowly. She tilted her head, line by line, $83,422.87. His eyes skimmed the pages. Reception venue paid in full. Dress charged to her account. Honeymoon deposit covered in advance, tips, staff, backup rentals, linens. Her name on every single invoice. "Why would you keep this?" he muttered. "To remind myself what I gave," she said, "so I wouldn't let you rewrite the story." He sat back, eyes glassy now. "So what, you're punishing me?" "No," she said, setting her tea down with a soft clink. "I'm doing what your father never got to do, teach you consequences." His voice cracked, small now. "Dad would have." "Your father died trying to protect this family," she cut in. "Not cruelly, but finally. And you've spent the last 10 years bleeding it dry under the excuse of grief. You are not entitled to my sacrifice, Andrew. You're merely standing on top of it." Silence. The kind that dared either of them to move. I'm not a bad person, he whispered. She stood slowly, smoothing her skirt. Then be a better one. He blinked up at her, tears close now. Are you disowning me? Eleanor walked toward the front door, calm as marble. I'm redefining what I own, and it's not you. He didn't move. She opened the door. It's time to leave. Mom. Andrew, you still think this is about a wedding? It's not. It's about every time you mistook my silence for agreement, every time you cashed love as currency. You always had my love. You just stopped deserving my money. He walked slowly to the door, numb. She didn't hug him, didn't kiss his cheek. When he stepped through, she didn't say goodbye, just closed the door, locked it, then without hesitation, turned the bolt. Click. Outside, Andrew stood on the porch, staring at the locked door, not yet realizing this wasn't the end of a conversation. It was the end of access. Next day, Sloane's father stood stiffly beside her in their marble-tiled kitchen, jaw locked, hand clenched around his phone. You mean to tell me the venue bill is still unpaid? Andrew didn't blink. It was supposed to go through my mother's account. Well, Sloane's mother snapped, your mother pulled out quietly, like a ghost. Her voice twisted on the word. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then, with his credit score already bleeding from missed utilities and a wedding ring he hadn't even paid off yet, Andrew did what he swore he never would. He applied for a short-term loan, 22.9% interest, approved in 30 seconds. The screen blinked back at him like a dare. Sloane called the honeymoon a waste. The first night in Maui, she scrolled on her phone, barely looking up. We shouldn't have even come if we didn't have it all handled. This isn't what I signed up for. Andrew watched her pick apart her Caesar salad while ignoring the ocean 10 feet away. By the end of the trip, she'd moved into her parents' guest suite just to sort things out. It didn't help that the headlines followed him back to Charleston. A gossip blog had picked up his mother's sudden departure, using the words retracted funds and abandoned tab. The wedding planner had leaked details anonymously. His PR firm had no interest in scandal. No matter how clean his suits were, due to reputational concerns, we'll be ending your contract effective immediately, HR had said, cold, clinical, already rehearsed. Back in her quiet condo, her own unshared, untouched, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, reading a letter in slanted, familiar handwriting. Her sister-in-law had always sent cards with seasonal flowers etched in gold foil. This one said simply, Eleanor, I heard what happened. He'd be proud of you, finally choosing your own dignity over devotion. He would have fought for you if he could. You did it for yourself. That's harder. She read it once, then again. Her fingers trembled, and then she cried. Not softly, not politely, not like someone being watched. She let herself fall apart, shoulders shaking, breath breaking. It had been 28 years since her husband passed, and she realized she hadn't cried this hard for him since the day they lowered him into the ground. Grief never left. It just dressed differently. After the tears dried, she walked into her den, opened a drawer, and pulled out the manila envelope labeled Condo Andrew. She clicked her pen once and signed the contract to sell it. The condo had never been transferred to his name, not legally, just borrowed under trust. She didn't bother telling him. The papers would speak for her. The next morning, Eleanor woke to a headline, Bride posts viral TikTok accusing toxic in-laws of ruining wedding. Sloane's face filled the frame, tearful yet flawlessly contoured. I just want to say, I loved Andrew. I didn't marry him for money. I married him because he was kind. But when family members sabotage your future out of bitterness, that's what ruins love. Not bills, not stress, bitterness. The comments were vicious, split between sympathy and venom. One even wrote, Girl, didn't your wedding cost $80,000? Sounds like you married a bank account. Eleanor watched it once. That was enough. She forwarded it to her lawyer. Attached was a list. Diamond earrings, designer shoes, a custom couture gown, all gifts from Eleanor over the past 6 months, documented receipts intact. Her lawyer responded by 10 a.m. Subject, elder financial exploitation. Preliminary filing complete. Status, in process. Targeting luxury asset retrieval. She closed the laptop, set her tea beside it, and stared out the window. As sunlight spilled through the shutters, her silence hadn't been surrender. It had been strategy. A grainy shot taken by a barista in Asheville. Eleanor, serene, sat beneath the string lights of the cafe courtyard, sipping from a china teacup. Her purse, a structured navy blue leather relic with gold clasp and worn handles, rested proudly in her lap. The caption read, "This woman came in every morning with this vintage bag and the calmest look I've ever seen." Like she knew something no one else did. Within a week, the photo was circulating in women's money forums under the tag hash Fossil with Power. A thread opened titled, "Let's talk about the quiet strength of women who paid for everything and asked for nothing." Someone posted a link to a new episode of The Second Chapter, a financial podcast aimed at women over 60. It was titled, "When Generosity Becomes a Weapon Used Against You." Eleanor's voice, steady and smooth like a radio wave, filled the episode. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. "I was called a fossil with a purse," she said, pausing just enough to let the words bruise. They laughed behind champagne glasses I paid for. They toasted with wine I selected and served on dishes I bought. And still I was background. I was the ATM with pearls. The host asked gently, "Why share this now?" There was a smile in Eleanor's tone, because women need to know the difference between kindness and surrender, between love and obligation. Money is love, but only when it's respected. A silence, then applause. Not from the studio. Eleanor had recorded her story anonymously from a guest room in Asheville. The applause came later, from thousands of listeners who flooded the comments. "She could have been my mom. I left my fiancé after hearing this. This woman didn't lose a son. She reclaimed herself. No one used her full name. They didn't need to. Eleanor never wanted fame. She wanted oxygen. And this felt like breathing for the first time in years." Back in Charleston, Andrew sat on his friend's thrift store sofa watching the podcast light up his timeline under burner accounts he thought Eleanor wouldn't know existed. One clip, looped and subtitled, stabbed sharper than the rest. "Silence isn't peace, sometimes it's suffocation." He didn't have to ask. He knew it was her. He remembered the purse, too. She'd had it since he was 12. He used to complain it was too loud for church, too old lady. That same purse had held his childhood inhalers, his college orientation packet, the keys to the car she bought him on graduation day. And now it held the receipts, literal and metaphorical, that reminded him who had actually built his life. Across town, Sloane opened the door to a courier, legal packet in hand. She skimmed the latest filings from Eleanor's attorney, then set them down on the marble counter without blinking. She opened her notes app and began typing. Petition for divorce, irreconcilable differences and emotional abandonment. Filed, sent. No ceremony, just a digital signature. She hadn't spoken to Andrew in 4 days. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained offline. Her Instagram was gone, Facebook deactivated. No alerts, no comments, no mentions. Instead, she sat at her new kitchen table, smaller, warmer, next to a vase of sunflowers, rereading a letter from the director of the Women's Legal Fund she'd donated to. "Your contribution allowed us to represent 4 elderly women who were being coerced into financial contracts by their families. They won their cases. Thank you." She placed the letter in the side pocket of her purse, then zipped it shut with care. Not because she was hiding anything, but because the purse, like her, had never been about appearance. It was about utility, about weight, about survival. Andrew stood in front of the condo, shoulders hunched beneath a wrinkled suit jacket he hadn't dry cleaned in weeks. The Charleston sun beat down, unrelenting, as a notice fluttered on the front door, half taped, half peeling. Notice of sale. Property under escrow review, no entry without agent present. His name wasn't even on it, not legally. He jiggled the handle anyway. Locked. A neighbor walked past with a stroller, offering him a tight smile, the kind you give to someone you're not sure you should still wave at. Andrew exhaled through his nose, then reached under the doormat on instinct. No spare key. But taped inside the brass mailbox, protected in a clear plastic sleeve, was a single house key. Attached was a cream-colored note card in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting, delicate cursive blue ink. "This was never a gift. It was a loan against my dignity. E." He stared at it until the sweat on his brow blurred the words. Inside the condo looked the same, but emptier somehow. The scent of citrus cleaning spray lingered in the air, faint and cruel. She'd had it professionally cleaned before the sale, of course. Everything personal had been removed. Photos, books, the antique mirror she'd once said was too nice for a rental. He wandered the kitchen. The fridge was unplugged, the pantry empty. A folder lay neatly on the granite island. Inside, a copy of the deed transfer, financial itemization of the condo's expenses, and a ledger titled Andrew's Life Expenses 2007 to 2023. Oh, it listed in brutal specificity: university tuition $82,600. First car $21,000, apartment furniture $4,500, wedding advance expenses $39,100. At the bottom, in tiny print, this list is for your clarity, not guilt. We are all accountable for the debts we accrue, emotional or financial. Andrew slumped onto the couch, still there, but no longer his. He didn't cry, he didn't yell. He just sat as if the walls were pressing in with every breath. That night, he moved into Tyler's basement, his last available option. The place smelled like mildew and last week's pizza. He lay on the futon in the half-lit corner, scrolling through job listings, but his inbox said it all. Thanks, but we've gone in another direction. One email was harsher. Given your recent visibility online, we're concerned about liability. And Sloane? She wasn't returning texts. Instead, she was on a podcast called Modern Marriages When the Vows Go South, where she painted herself as a wounded newlywed. I married into a legacy that didn't exist. The mom was cold, and the groom emotionally bankrupt. It went viral. Andrew watched it alone, volume low, chewing stale crackers. She had perfect makeup, flawless lighting. She knew how to spin herself into a victim. He didn't even recognize her voice. It was polished, performative. He closed his laptop and sat in the dark. Across town, Eleanor watched too, but only once. No reaction, no email, no dramatic sigh. She closed the browser, unplugged the modem for the night, and went back to her tea. Jasmine with honey warmed her fingers as much as her chest, but later, while sorting her mail, a cream envelope stopped her hand. No return address, no frills, just her name, Eleanor M. Grant. She opened it cautiously. Mom. No defenses, no excuses. I failed you. You gave everything, I gave attitude. I wish I could rewrite it, but I know now I was lucky to have you. I'm sorry. Andrew. There was no ask. No manipulative PS, no desperate appeal for money or a second chance. Just sorrow, raw, unvarnished, and a signature smaller than she remembered. The letter sat on Eleanor's breakfast table, between the tea kettle and the latest issue of Southern Living. The handwriting was unmistakably Andrew's, slanted left, slightly rushed, like he was always trying to outrun responsibility. She'd read it once the night it arrived, again the next morning. Now, in the gray hush of dawn, she read it a third time. I failed you. You gave everything. I gave attitude. I wish I had seen you, not just the hand that fed me, but the heart behind it. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for the wedding, for the years I treated your silence like consent. You didn't deserve that. There were no promises, no asks, no hedging, but the ache it left was ancient, layered beneath decades of dutiful disappointments. Eleanor pressed the letter flat on the table, then smoothed its edges with both palms, as if it were delicate linen. Her tea had gone cold. Outside, a dog barked once and fell silent. She walked to her writing desk, an old mahogany piece Andrew once mocked for smelling like a funeral home, and pulled out a blank card. She wrote slowly, with surgical precision. Respect isn't owed. Neither is money. No salutation, no sign-off, no warmth. She slid it into an envelope, addressed it to Andrew, but never sealed it. She left it on her desk for 3 days unopened, then moved it to a drawer she rarely opened. Instead, she opened her legal folder. At her next appointment, she filed the final trust amendment, 0% to Andrew. The line was stark, clean, freeing. In his place, she added something that had been dormant too long, the Richard Grant Memorial Scholarship Fund, named for the man who died far too early but left his moral compass ticking inside her chest. The scholarship's first recipient was a girl named Dana, 17, first-generation college student, already working nights to pay for application fees. Eleanor read her essay 3 times, lingering on one line. My mom says women don't wait to be chosen, they build their own doors. Eleanor smiled when she read it aloud at the ceremony. The event was held in the community college auditorium, modest but warm, gold folding chairs lined up with military precision. A paper banner at the back, empowering through education. The Grant legacy begins. Eleanor stepped to the podium in a navy silk jacket and pearl earrings, not flashy, not meek, just enough to catch the light. She didn't bring the purse. The crowd quieted. A few flashes went off. Someone whispered, "That's her." She knew what they meant. The story had started spreading. "I won't speak long," she began, her voice crisp, "but I will speak clearly. Money is not love. It is a tool, and it should never be confused with affection nor used to purchase approval." Eyes blinked, cameras stilled. "I learned that too late," she continued, "but not too late to do something better with it. This scholarship is for those who understand that building something for yourself is the most powerful form of gratitude there is." The applause wasn't loud at first. It grew in waves, sincere, echoing across the room until it lifted her above the stage, into a moment she hadn't known she needed. Dana came up to her after, tears threatening the edge of her mascara. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Eleanor smiled gently. "Then just say thank you when you become someone no one expected. That'll be enough." A reporter from the Charleston Tribune approached her by the exit, flipping open a leather-bound notepad. "Miss Grant," he said, "I'd like to write about your story. What you've done with your wealth, your legacy. People should hear this. Women should hear this." She hesitated just for a second. "I've stayed quiet for a long time," she said slowly. "Maybe it's time I didn't." Eleanor, invited to speak at a university panel, the lecture hall at Charleston University buzzed with the low hum of anticipation. Rows of students, faculty, and guests filled the tiered seating, notebooks open, phones poised. On stage, under soft can lights, Eleanor Grant adjusted the collar of her slate gray blazer. She touched the lapel once, then twice, not from nerves, but control. This was her battlefield now, and for once she was ready to win without apology. The moderator introduced her as a philanthropist, advocate, and voice for financial empowerment in later life. Applause scattered politely. Eleanor took the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces, eager, skeptical, curious. She took a breath. "I've been called a fossil," she began, voice even, eyes steady, "by someone I raised, someone I paid tuition for, someone whose wedding I funded until I didn't." A few gasps, quickly muffled. A murmur swept the audience like a shifting wind. "I used to think that money was love," she continued, walking slowly to center stage. "So I gave quietly, over and over again. I paid for dreams that weren't mine and called it mothering. I paid for silence and called it peace. I paid for proximity and called it family." No one moved. "But here's what I learned. Money isn't love. Love is respect. And when you confuse the two, you start overdrafting your soul." The crowd was still, but something had shifted. Phones lowered, pens stopped, every eye clung to her. "I was never a fossil," she said, voice rising just slightly. "I was the foundation. And like any good foundation, I finally realized if you keep building on top of me without care, I have the right to crack." Applause broke out, uneven at first, then rising. Eleanor waited for it to settle. Her expression remained calm, but her shoulders relaxed for the first time in years. Afterward, a group of young women formed a quiet line by the stage. One stepped forward, eyes glassy, clutching a leather-bound planner. "You just saved me," she said, voice trembling. "My mom's on the same path. I was about to become that son. The one who takes—" Eleanor didn't smile. She placed a hand gently over the girl's planner. "Then don't," she said. "It's not too late. Love her out loud while she's still listening." Another approached, saying nothing, only embracing her tightly. Eleanor froze for a beat, then returned the hug. It was the kind of gesture she used to beg for in small ways: eye contact, a birthday card, a thank you. Now it came freely, and she hadn't paid a cent. She exited through a side door, heels clicking against polished linoleum, breath light in her chest. The air outside was cool, the sky that dusky rose gold only late autumn could offer. She walked to her car, a modest hybrid she bought herself the year after the wedding fallout, and noticed something tucked under her windshield wiper. Her heart stalled. It was a folded piece of thick stationery, familiar handwriting, Andrew's. She opened it slowly, bracing. "Mom, I understand. Thank you for the house, even when I didn't deserve it. No begging, no spin, just that." The wind rustled the oaks overhead. Somewhere nearby, a distant bell tower chimed 6. Eleanor stood still for a long time, then she folded the note and placed it in the glove compartment. She wouldn't write back. Not yet, maybe not ever. Some bridges don't burn, they simply close. That night, as she tucked herself into bed, the room felt different. Not bigger, not smaller, just hers. The covers were crisp, the pillow cool, and for the first time in decades, her body didn't brace before rest. She slept, not just deeply, peacefully. At dawn, her phone buzzed with a new email. Subject line, "Let's talk memoir potential. Your story deserves a book." Sender, Redacted Literary Group, New York. Eleanor blinked once, then smiled. The sun filtered through the lace curtains of Eleanor's condo, scattering gentle gold across her dining table. It wasn't much of an office, just a laptop, a ceramic mug of chamomile, and a thick folder labeled Documentation. But to her, it was Command Central, her war room, her sanctuary. She opened a fresh document and typed 2 words, "Fossil with a purse." She stared at the title for a long moment, then she smiled. It was the last insult she would ever accept and the first title she would ever own. The first chapter opened exactly where her transformation began, the rehearsal dinner. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard as she recalled the icy sting of Andrew's voice, the smug laughter of his groomsmen, the metallic clang of that sentence in her ribcage. "She's just a fossil with a purse." Eleanor typed slowly but deliberately. Her voice on the page was neither vengeful nor saccharine. It was surgical, honest. She chronicled the facts. $83,000 transferred, a custom Vera Wang gown she never saw Sloane thank her for, the diamond studs gifted from her mother, passed on without acknowledgement. But she didn't rant. She documented. Each chapter ended the same way, an image scan of a receipt, a check stub, or a notarized document. Every detail time-stamped, itemized, indisputable. It wasn't just memoir. It was evidence. A ledger of love misunderstood and limits reclaimed. She worked in long, quiet stretches, pausing only to sip tea or watch the riverboats drift lazily across the Cooper River from her balcony. Days bled into weeks, pages turned into chapters. The publisher, an indie imprint in Charleston, had initially reached out through email, then over a polite phone call. "We'd love to publish this. It's unlike anything else. Gentle but blistering. Would you consider a regional tour?" She'd chuckled softly. "I appreciate the offer," she'd said, "but I'm finally somewhere I want to stay." They respected her answer. They printed a limited run. Word traveled anyway. Bookstores in Atlanta, Savannah, and Charlotte placed standing orders. A podcast host requested an interview. One university emailed about licensing the material for their gender and aging studies course. And the advance? She signed the entire sum, $15,000, over to a senior housing initiative that helped elderly women escape coercive family dynamics. "No one should have to buy their way out of love," she wrote in the memo line. She didn't watch the Amazon ranking. She didn't post about it on social media. She didn't even tell most of her neighbors the book existed. The same way she did now, on her terms. One morning, while preparing a light breakfast of honeyed toast and berries, a white envelope appeared in her mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single RSVP card, gilded edges, black ink. "Eleanor, we're hosting a small 70th birthday for you. You have no idea how many lives you've touched. Please say yes. With admiration, Linda, Marcy, Darlene, and the rest of the coffee circle." She traced her thumb across the names, her heart catching in her throat. These were the women she mentored, women who once sat across from her at community meetings, trembling from evictions, divorces, fear. Now they were pillars like her. And they were inviting her, not out of obligation, but love. A tear welled, but didn't fall. She placed the RSVP on the windowsill. She didn't need to check yes. They already knew. For most of her life, Eleanor planned celebrations with one goal: make others feel seen. This time, the spotlight turned, and for once, she didn't look away. The Charleston Community Center glowed under warm string lights, casting a golden sheen over the polished wood floors and linen-covered tables. Music hummed from a jazz trio tucked into the corner, upright bass, brushed snare, trumpet moaning softly. It wasn't extravagant, but it was intentional. Eleanor paused just inside the double doors, cane in one hand, the original purse draped elegantly over her shoulder. She hadn't bought a new dress, hadn't needed to. A simple navy sheath, pearls at her throat, and the quiet power of a woman who'd stopped apologizing for her existence did more than sequins ever could. "Miss Eleanor," called a voice near the refreshment table. She turned to see 3 scholarship recipients waving, 2 young women she'd met only once, and one who now interned at the housing nonprofit. Their joy wasn't just admiration, it was gratitude, it was recognition. She moved slowly through the room, receiving hugs from neighbors who once asked to borrow her sugar, From a retired librarian who used to share morning crossword puzzles from Marcy, the first woman Eleanor ever coached through reclaiming property, from an exploitative son-in-law. Even the catering was chosen with care: Southern classics, shrimp and grits, pimento cheese crostini, sweet tea in mason jars, each labeled with handwritten cards, Eleanor's favorites. Midway through the evening, the MC tapped a spoon gently to a glass. The room quieted. "We're here tonight, not to just celebrate 70 years," she began, "but to honor the woman who taught us that visibility isn't vanity, it's survival. Please join me in welcoming our guest of honor, Eleanor Grant." A gentle wave of applause swelled into a standing ovation as Eleanor approached the small platform stage. Her cane echoed once against the wooden step before she steadied herself and looked out across the crowd. She didn't have a speech, just something that had waited decades to be said. "I stayed quiet too long," she said, voice calm but resonant. "I thought giving meant disappearing, but tonight I see the faces of people who proved me wrong. Thank you for hearing me." "Finally!" Applause thundered again. She didn't need to say more. The silence she had broken had done the talking. Back at her table, a small box sat near her water glass, wrapped in pale lavender tissue. No name on the tag. Inside was a replica of her handbag, her worn, beloved purse recast in molded resin, painted a brilliant antique gold. On it, a tiny placard read, "Not a fossil, a monument." For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. Her hand trembled slightly as she turned the card over. In smaller print, "From the women you showed how to carry themselves again." She pressed the purse gently to her chest. The applause from earlier still hummed in her bones. The night wound down with slow dancing, pears, shared peach cobbler, and dozens of photos snapped in front of a DIY photo booth banner that read, "Visible at any age." As the crowd thinned, Eleanor slipped out into the warm Charleston night, stars bleeding through the oak branches overhead. The weight of the evening didn't make her tired. It made her lighter. She stepped into her car, silence folding around her like a silk shawl. It was the kind of silence she had never feared, only the kind she'd longed for. The silence of dignity, not dismissal. Her phone buzzed just once as she set her purse down on the passenger seat. A voicemail. She tapped it open. Andrew's voice crackled faintly through the speaker. "Mom, if you ever want to talk, I'm listening now." "I really am." She didn't play it again. She just sat there, one hand resting on the golden purse, and let the message echo until it faded into the night. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table just after dawn, Charleston's light soft and honeyed against the glass. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and the toasted rye bread cooling by the sink. Her phone sat in front of her, screen dark, but she knew what it held. She had listened to Andrew's voicemail once. That was enough. His voice had wavered. He sounded smaller, not contrite exactly, but no longer smug. "If you ever want to talk, I'm listening." She tapped her finger against the phone's edge, then without hesitation hit delete. There was no satisfaction in it, no vengeance, just stillness. She stood and moved with deliberate care through the house, past framed photographs of her community work, the hand-penned thank you letters from scholarship recipients, and one golden replica of her old purse, now displayed like a piece of art on her hallway shelf. At the cemetery, the breeze was light and cool, rolling in from the harbor with the scent of sea salt and moss-covered stone. She walked to the headstone carved with James R. Grant, beloved husband and father. It was a simple marker, dignified but modest, just like he'd been. "I finally stopped paying for love," Eleanor said, placing a single red rose against the granite base. "I think you'd understand now." She knelt slowly. Her knees ached more than usual today, and slipped the folded scholarship gala program beneath the bouquet. It had her name printed in bold across the front. Below it, a photo of the first recipient, smiling beside a quote from Eleanor's speech. "You are not indebted. You are seen." She stayed a few minutes longer, listening to the wind in the trees above her. No tears came. She'd wept enough years ago. This moment was not grief. It was closure. Downtown, the cafe on the corner still had the same mismatched chairs, the smell of fresh brewed coffee curling into the street, and the same young waiter who always noticed when she walked in. "Miss Grant," he beamed as she approached, "we were hoping we'd see you today." He led her to the window booth, the one she'd claimed as her writing space for over a year while working on Fossil with a Purse. The worn leather bag, the purse, rested beside her, its presence no longer defensive but declarative. A small slice of chocolate cake arrived, thick with ganache and dusted with powdered sugar. No bill, just a post-it note tucked underneath. For the woman who turned dignity into a headline, on the house. Eleanor smiled, lifting her glass of iced hibiscus tea. To being visible, she said aloud, quiet but firm. The toast wasn't to the past. It was to the decision to step into the light and stay there. She took a bite of cake, watching the city move beyond the window. Students rushing to class, a woman walking two golden retrievers, a teenager holding hands with her mother. Someone outside pointed toward the cafe window. A girl, around 13, whispered something to her father and waved. Eleanor didn't know her, but she waved back. Then she laughed. Not a small chuckle, but a full, unguarded burst of joy, the kind that shakes off decades. The purse slung over her shoulder as she rose, not as armor, not as irony, just part of her, a symbol reclaimed. She stepped out into the Charleston sun, laughing, purse swinging proudly at her side. Not owned, not overlooked, but seen, completely, finally seen.